If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. And before I bring on today's guest, I want to share with you an offer that you may well be interested in, and that is a 125-point checklist to uncover profitable income streams from your book. I know that many of you are looking to make money with your book. Here are some ideas that you may not have thought about. If you would like a copy of this, then email me at susan@bookmarketingmentors.com. There's also a link below in the show notes. So make sure that you grab your copy and also subscribe to this podcast because you don't want to miss an episode of our great experts who share their wisdom with you. Now, let's get on with the show. Today, my special guest is Ron Karr. Ron has worked with leaders on 6 continents to eliminate risk, gain buy-in, and achieve better results faster with the velocity mindset. His presentations and advisory services have generated over $1 billion in incremental revenue for his clients. Ron is the author of 5 books, including his latest, Velocity Mindset, and his bestseller, Lead, Sell, and Get Out the Way. A dear friend and National Speaker Association colleague, Ron, what an absolute pleasure it is to welcome you to the show, and thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Well, thank you, Susan. The honor and privilege is all mine, so thank you for inviting me to be here today.
It's wonderful to have you. Let's talk about mindset. I know that you focus on working a lot with corporations, with leaders. However, I think mindset is sort of pretty universal. However, the whole idea of velocity mindset, now that's intriguing. So tell us, what does that mean exactly?
Susan, when you hear the word velocity, the first word comes to your mind is?
To me, it's something like speed.
Right. Now, that's what most people will say, and they're right. But that's only half the equation. If all you think is speed, that's when you get burnout. Because how many times have we been going through our to-do lists with speed, and at the end of the day, we're so tired, but we're looking and say, what did we really accomplish? Because half the things we were doing really didn't have any direct impact on what we really wanted to accomplish. So the true definition of velocity is the same as the physics definition. It's speed with direction. What you always have to do is you have to ask yourself, what is the end result I'm really after? And do my actions that I'm doing right now support that end result? If we can just be better at that, crystallizing the vision of what our end result is and making sure our actions support that, there will be an automatic bump in velocity in terms of how well and how fast you're achieving the things you want to achieve in life.
I like that. Speed, but there's direction to it as well. Now, talk about what stands in the way of that, because I think we're our own worst enemy, especially when it comes to mindset and head trash and all the nonsense that goes on inside and outside our brains.
The head trash that you're referring to, I refer as our stories. I've done a lot of work in this. I've done work on both ends, both from participating with a therapist or wisdom teachers and looking at my own life, and also from coaching people. We have certain periods in our lives where we identified a story about ourselves. Age 6, around that time, then we get to a teenager, you're a young adult. Something significant happens to us in those times, and then we interpret it as a story. The best way I can explain it is Susan, we've talked about this subject before, the Holocaust. My father was a victim of the Holocaust. He wasn't in a camp, but he was trying to escape from Poland. He wound up in a Siberian camp for 2 years of hell. And when you see the atrocities that he saw, I mean, it's been documented children of Holocaust survivors tend to have had some abuse in their household. Because someone like my father, who definitely loved me, they were just really damaged, by what they saw and what they had to deal with. So when my father would go off on me in ways that you would never go off on a child, especially in today's world, and say some things you would never say to a child, I immediately attached the story as to how he thought of me and that I was no good and that I'm a fraud and all that. But when I came to realize that's just my story, it's how I interpreted what he did for the reasons he did. He obviously could have had a different reason for doing it, although doing it was not what should have happened. But the thing that's impacted me 64 years later is not so much what was done, because that was a while back. It's the stories as to what I think it meant. And those stories tend to get in our way of pushing forward. Because when I came out of living at home and going to college, I was very insecure for a few years. As a matter of fact, I became a speaker for the wrong reason. I thought if I can stand on stage and, proverbial be naked, they can slay the dragons and be up there and be with my harshest critics and also know that I'm not a fraud. I actually became a speaker for the wrong reason, Susan. We shouldn't be doing our own therapy up there. When I realized that, and what it did, though, it made me go after the wrong thing, because the goal for me was to be the best speaker anybody ever heard. That's too much pressure on anybody. And a lot of how people rate us has nothing to do with who we are. It's what they're going through at that moment. But when I changed the context and the story, that from my story being that I'm not enough to now I'm more than enough, and I look back in my history, all the things that proved it, and when I changed the reason as to why I'm up there, which was not to be the best speaker anybody's ever heard, but to help them fill the gaps in their lives, they brought me in for a message. They wanted to hear that message. My job is simply to relay that message and customize it as to what it means in their world. Doing it with the audience, and the audience is a lot of published authors, and I'm sure they want to sell their books, and get their messages out to the world because they think that the message is valuable, and they should. The first thing I'd ask them to do right now is, what stories are they living with about themselves that might be creating drag on their velocity? And how can they just recognize it's just a story, it's not reality? And if they don't like the story, since they're authors, how can they rewrite that story?
There are a lot of gems here, Ron,
Mm-hmm.
and thank you. One of them obviously was, like you said, going out there and speaking for the wrong reason. But then you also said that message, and you want to make sure that your message, you're putting out that message for the right reasons. Because as you know, you and I talked about this, our listeners primarily are authors, nonfiction authors, but book contains a message. It has value. It's that value that they want to take out to other people, but they've got to get their own house in order before they can do that. Other than going to a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
how can we do that easily? Is there sort of a plan that comes sort of before the velocity or to gain the velocity? The speed and the direction.
Let's look at velocity as not a static result, but it's a journey. Because each and every day, things come in our way that interrupt our velocity, and we have to figure out how to get over these new bumps. We look at it as a journey. Anytime one of your listeners wants to accomplish something, and the moment they start giving themselves a reason as to why they can't or why it cannot happen, that's a story. If they can just recognize that it's a story and it's not necessarily the reality, it's what they're telling themselves, that's half the battle. It's like anybody else who has any kind of condition, alcoholism or whatever, or anger or whatever, or good things also. It doesn't always have to be bad things. The half the battle is just recognizing it. When you recognize it, then you can deal with it. After you recognize it, then the question is, how do you want to rewrite the story? Now, in order to do that, you have to start with first, what do you want to become? What's your vision? What's the goal that you're after? And when you have that very clear in your mind, then the simple question is, does your story support that goal? And if it's not, since you created that story, you can rewrite it. How do you need to rewrite it that will allow you then to move forward beyond this, eliminate that drag, and continue your journey for what you're trying to accomplish?
And sometimes I think we don't even realize that it's a drag. I think, as you said, it's a story, but we've told it so many times that we believe that it's reality, even though it really isn't. As you said, it's just a story.
Right. You look at a chair and you say to somebody, what's that called? A chair. Why? Because it's a chair. Well, who says it's a chair? Well, that's what we all call it. But that's the same story that we've all talked about. But understand, there's no reason why that's labeled a chair other than we gave it a word. You follow what I'm saying? Well, that's the same thing about our own stories. There's no reason that the story is there other than the fact that we gave it strength through the fuel that we kept giving it by believing in it. And when people can realize that they have the power inside of themselves to recognize that it's really just a story and that it can be written, I mean, that just unleashes a whole new world of creativity and opportunities for people.
So what I'm hearing, Ron, is really knowing and understanding who you are and the message, obviously, and the value that you can bring to the marketplace. And obviously that has to be authentic. And the authenticity comes from deep down inside you. Would you agree?
Exactly. A common story that we all have, and even the top entertainers and authors and everybody who's out there constantly, is the story of being a fraud. And when we were researching for the Velocity Mindset, we found an item about Tom Hanks, where he suffers from that even to today. And every time he does a movie, the story comes out in his mind, oh, wait until they see what was really behind this. Sometimes you're not going to eliminate your stories either. Sometimes they're going to come back that they rear their ugly head. But the key is not to let it stop you. The key is to acknowledge the story and what can you do so it doesn't stop you. Because every time you're thinking about it, then it takes away from you thinking about what it is you can do. That's a key difference. Your brain can only think about one thing at a time. We talk about multitasking. There really is no such thing as multitasking. You can try and do more than one thing concurrently, but at that specific moment when you're doing something, that's all you're thinking about. What would you rather be thinking about? The reasons why you can't because of the stories you've created, like I'm potentially a fraud, or thinking about how can I make this the best day for that audience, whether they're reading my book or they're listening to me speak, and what would it look like? Think about that, then you'll carry out a different set of actions.
That's going from being self-centered to being your audience-centered, them-centered, which obviously, as you said, is far more powerful. It's so funny that you use the example of Tom Hanks because in my author marketing mastery program, I talk about the imposter syndrome and I use Tom Hanks as an example of celebrities. There's Oprah and Meryl Streep and Jodie Foster and even Lady Gaga. They've all admitted at some point or other that they felt like a fraud. We're in good company if we feel that.
We are, but here's another scenario. So Barbra Streisand, great actress, great singer. She's been documented to have stage fright. So bad that it took a lot of energy to get on stage, and that's why she stopped performing. Now, I don't know if that's the only reason, but she talked about it on an interview. That's an example where a story gets in the way and creates drag from your velocity.
Now, I don't know if this is something that you've researched, but I wonder, as we get older, does that get better or worse?
As we get older, our stories change. Well, they can change because we're dealing with different realities. So why did I come up with the velocity mindset and why did I write it? Well, I had several back surgeries after I was done with the presidency of the National Speakers Association. And I was basically down from speaking for 2 to 3 years until I was able to move around with no pain. And while I was laying in bed, and doped up on all these pills, I started, as we all do, realizing what's my legacy? What am I really here for? Because I'm starting to get bored. I was a sales trainer originally. I started doing sales keynotes. And then my business morphed where I started working with CEOs and C-suite of small to mid-sized businesses, where I was having greater impacts on them by getting into the things that are stopping them individually, just like what we're talking about now. And the reason why that became so powerful for me is because I realized how much I lost in life by allowing those stories that I grew up with from my father. I realized I could have gone further. I could have done more things in my life. I could have made greater impacts. And now at 64, golf term that we use, you're on your back 9. I'm probably on my back 4, if you know what I mean. My window is shortened. So now I feel it even more in my gut that I've got to do whatever I can and limit my stories so that I can make the greatest impact while I'm still on this earth. And so as we get older and we start realizing that our mortality is actually real and you start thinking about it, it can create other stories for the people, like there's no time left. What am I going to do with my legacy? And I just read a book by this author, Irv Yalom, who's actually one of the famed therapists on death. And he talked about that as we get older, the stories that really stop us is the stories we entertain about our legacy. And what he was getting at is that's too much to ask of anybody, because who's going to know we were here in 50 years, in 100 years? Who's going to know we were here? So is it really your legacy that you're after? Or is it what he called rippling? What can I do with Susan that's going to make an impact on her life, that's going to be so powerful that she's going to continue it with somebody else who then will continue with somebody else? There'll be no name attached to it necessarily as it goes through time. But that idea is going to ripple through society, continuing to make those impacts. And when you can sit at the end of your days and say, man, I've created a lot of ripples that have helped a lot of people and I'm satisfied, that's all you can ask for. As you get older, you may be developing some other stories as to what that means to you, what you feel you did, you didn't do. And again, if you change the story, it's not about you, it's not about the legacy. It's how can I feel more fulfilled by knowing that I've helped others, I've left things behind that are making a tremendous impact in the world.
That's very powerful, very, very powerful, because it is all about what are we doing to help the world be a better place? Yeah, it's a ripple effect. Mm-hmm. I always talk about just finding a niche market, for instance. It's like you throw the pebble in the pond and let the ripples flow out. And this is a similar idea of that ripple effect.
It's almost like when you're on a lake, and I know you're up in Lake Placid, so you got a great lake up there. But if you're on the shore of the lake and you take a pebble and you throw it, and it keeps bouncing and the ripples keep spreading, that's what we're talking about. That's the image.
That's the image, yeah. Let's go back to the book, Ron. And I know in the book you talk about the art of the pause. How does that affect what we've been talking about, this whole idea of velocity?
It affects it in every way possible. All of us were into a forced pause at the beginning of this year when the lockdown happened. And as a result of that, it gave us time to really think, what are we really doing? Is this what we want to be doing? What could we be doing differently? I mean, things that were taken for granted are now all broken up as like working from home. That's going to become a reality for a lot of people. A lot of employees that want to go back to work, and employees are going to have to understand that. We both know Brian Tracy. I don't know if you were there when he did his keynote at NSA, but he started it magnificently by pretending he was running on a treadmill. And he was doing it for 10 minutes while he was doing his talk. And the image that he was trying to emblazon in our minds was the concept of, are you living your life on a treadmill where you're just going from one thing to another without really thinking, what does this really mean? And what I'm doing now, how's it going to help me get there? Or do we pause? Do we pause to really reevaluate what we're after? Does it keep the passion for us? And are the actions we're taking the right actions? I can break this down into any aspect. When I work with salespeople, the pause is before you call up the customer, what's the goal you want to accomplish? And is it the right goal? If it takes the salesperson 5 calls to close a deal, and the first thing he's only thinking about in the first call is, I want to sell this person, that's not an appropriate goal, because he'll be talking too much, he won't be listening, and he'll be trying to close, and he'll lose that prospect. But if he paused and thought about what his sales cycle is really about and what is the legitimate goal for this first meeting, it really is to identify an opportunity that we're both interested in, to qualify them, and to see what the next steps are. That would be a valid goal for the first call. What it really comes down to is, before you do anything, before you call anybody, before you start on a project, ask yourself first, what do I really want to accomplish from it? And are these actions the right actions? If not, what do I need to change? That's what the pause does.
Yes, and now so many people, as you rightly say, are reconsidering their whole life. People who have been on the road the whole time, many of our speaker colleagues who have spent so much time on the road are suddenly realizing perhaps they don't have to have that life all the time.
You're right, because I had my plan after my back surgeries. I said, wow, I got to make back this money because they really pushed me back. So my plan was to fly around until 70, do all these keynotes, and then I can slow down. So COVID happens. And all of a sudden, I just asked myself, why do I have to wait 6 more years? What COVID proves is we don't know how much time we have. Why can't you slow down now? So I was just looking at my business, and I said, well, why don't I go to Florida now? I was planning on moving in a few years. Who says I can't move to Florida? We're working from home anyway. Who says I can't move to Florida now, live in shorts, play golf, and just adjust my business to meet the lifestyle that I want, but also to give me the means to support it? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So it's really taking stock of what are the opportunities out there. And obviously, so many people think of the pandemic as a lemon. Well, how do we make lemonade out of this lemon? Because, yeah, we've had to pivot our businesses, our thinking, our whole lifestyle to accommodate this now.
Right. But the key is to understand that the pause is not static, meaning we pause now, we adjust what we want in our plan. So don't think you don't have to pause tomorrow and the day after. You have to pause each and every day, because each and every day we get new information. And when we process that new information, it may impact what we're after. I mean, Abe Lincoln had a great quote when he said, don't expect me to answer the same thing the same way tomorrow, because I'm a different person tomorrow, because I have new data points that are coming in to help me figure out what the next step is. The pause really should be a part of their journey. Every time you start something, you call somebody, you want to start a project, pause. Where's my passion? What am I really after? And what's the best way to get there?
Yeah, just even thinking about that whole idea of stopping just for a few minutes, a few hours, just to rethink everything, because we're so used to being on this perpetual treadmill, just as you said with Brian Tracy. But we can be like that hamster that goes around and round and round.
Exactly. I was getting dizzy from that. I don't know about you, Susan, but I was getting dizzy.
I've been on that treadmill. I have. It's not a pretty sight, but you somehow tell yourself the story that you can't stop it.
And it leads to another story. So all of a sudden, you're on the treadmill, right? You realize you didn't achieve what you wanted because you weren't doing the right things. And then you build another story on top of it and said, oh, there's no use. I'll never get there. No, it's just you didn't get there yet because you didn't have the right actions to support the purpose you're after.
And was the purpose clear?
Exactly.
And was it the right purpose?
And that is so important. It's the vision. Is if you can really see that purpose that you're after, and if it really energizes you, that's when you know you have the right purpose.
Yes. I always start with passion. I talk about your foundational blueprint, and that's made up of two things, and that is your message and your passion.
Right.
Your passion and your message, whichever order you want it. But it's those two things that I believe make up your foundation blueprint for whatever you do.
And you know what the biggest story is that gets in the way of all of our blueprints to achieve our vision?
Tell us.
The victim mindset.
Yeah, that victim mindset. Talk to us a little bit about that.
we can learn things intellectually, but understanding it inside of you and making it part of you is a different story. I learned it from the second way through my back surgeries because I was on a fast pace. I was just president of NSA, and now I got this thing coming at me that's really debilitating me. And I had a victim mindset, a poor me. It didn't serve me well. I mean, people were there for me, but it really, in my opinion, retarded some of my progress. Now, fast forward to last September, when I made the decision to move to Florida, went to my cardiologist because they were tracking a tight valve that was getting tighter. And he did an echo because my intuition came up. That's another thing we wrote in the book. And I said, if you're going to do this, you might as well walk your talk. If your intuition is saying go for another echo before you move, do it. And thankfully I did because he shut me down and said, you need to have your aorta valve replaced now. Well, I remember sitting, waiting in the hospital for that operation versus the backs. I was a totally different person. I was not thinking about poor me, the victim. I was thinking about what life was going to be when I didn't have to worry about getting dizzy and out of breath and how much more things I can do and what I wanted to do. That's the difference.
So it's getting out of that victim mindset.
Yes.
And realizing, there's life beyond that. And I allow myself maybe a day max if I need to have a pity party. And it's like, enough already. Come on, get on with life.
You can do your pity parties. I do them too. But understand, give them a time limit.
Exactly.
And then say, okay, we're done. Next.
It's not that you need to deny yourself that pity party because we all need it once in a while. But the fact is, you're right. It's like, okay, time's up. Get on with life. You had your time. Ron, if our listeners want to find out more about you or the book, how can they do that?
First of all, the book's being launched on May 11th. So if they go to Amazon at that time, they can definitely get the book at a discount from Amazon. Or they can go to my website and learn more about what we do, and they can see about the book there too, which is ronkarr.com. Now, Susan, as you well know, I have a story about my name because most people spell it C-A-R-R, but it's K-A-R-R. So if you're going to go to my website, please spell it RONKARR.com.
Excellent. Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. So if people want to get hold of you, but the easiest thing, Velocity Mindset, that book will be available May 11th on Amazon. And listeners, go get yourself a copy. I've read through it and pretty fascinating stuff. If you were to leave our listeners with a golden nugget, what would that be, Ron?
Originally, I was thinking about rippling, but since we covered that already, the golden nugget is what we all hear, but what we all have to really live inside. Life's too short. We complicate things. Make life simpler. What jazzes you? What are you motivated to do? Whatever it takes to get it done. And what should those actions be? And that's it. Don't think about anything else.
Fabulous. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I wish you much success with the book. Thank you for being our guest today. And thank you all for taking time out of your precious day to listen to this interview. And I sincerely hope that it sparked some ideas you can use to sell more books. Here's wishing you much book and author marketing success. And before I sign off completely for today, remember the 121-point checklist to uncover profitable income streams for your book. Email me at susan@bookmarketingmentors.com. It's in the show notes as well, the link. Get your copy. See you next week.
The time is now to take action and finally build your book-selling empire. And the great news is that Susan is here to help you. Visit bookmarketingmentors.com and sign up for a free 15-minute book marketing strategy session with Susan. She'll help you discover your first steps to marketing and selling your book. Only those who take action are rewarded, so visit bookmarketingmentors.com, and we'll see you again next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.